The sun shone brightly over the busy streets of Westbrook as an old blue pickup truck pulled into a parking spot across from Brilliant's Jewelers. The truck had seen better days. Small rust spots dotted the fenders, and a spiderweb crack spread across one corner of the windshield. It stood out like a sore thumb among the sleek sports cars and luxury sedans that typically occupied this upscale shopping district. Inside the truck, Rose adjusted the simple floral scarf around her neck and glanced nervously at her husband. "Are you sure about this, Frank? This place looks awfully fancy." Frank reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. His fingers were rough from decades of hard work, with calluses that told the story of a man who had never been afraid to get his hands dirty. 30 years together deserve something special, don't you think? Rose smiled and looked down at the plain gold band on her finger, the same one Frank had given her 3 decades ago when they couldn't afford anything elaborate. "I've never needed fancy things to be happy with you." "I know that," Frank said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's exactly why you deserve something nice for once." They stepped out of the truck, and Frank smoothed down his plaid button-up shirt, tucking it more securely into his faded jeans. Rose straightened her simple cotton dress, one she had made herself years ago and kept in good condition through countless washes and minor repairs. At 62 and 59, they carried themselves with the quiet dignity of people who had weathered life's storms together and come out stronger for it. The couple crossed the street hand in hand. Through the spotless glass windows of Brilliant's Jewelers, they could see crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across marble floors. Well-dressed customers bent over glass cases filled with sparkling treasures, while staff in crisp black suits hovered attentively nearby. "Maybe we should try that place in the mall instead," Rose whispered, hesitating as they reached the heavy glass door with its polished brass handle. Frank shook his head. "Patty at the diner says her daughter got her engagement ring here. Said they've got the best selection in 3 counties. He pulled the door open, setting off a discreet chime that announced their arrival. The cool air inside carried a hint of expensive perfume. For a moment, no one seemed to notice them, and they stood just inside the entrance, taking in the splendor around them. Display cases lined the walls, filled with diamonds that caught the light from every angle. In the center of the store, a circular counter housed trays of rings, each one seeming to outshine the next. "Can I help you find something?" The voice belonged to a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a name tag that read, Tiffany. Her smile seemed genuine enough, but her eyes darted briefly to Frank's scuffed work boots, and then to Rose's handbag, which had been carefully repaired along one seam. "We're just looking for now," Frank said pleasantly. "It's our anniversary coming up." "How lovely," Tiffany said. "What number?" 30 years, Rose replied with quiet pride. "Congratulations." Tiffany gestured toward a display case near the back of the store. "We have some lovely anniversary bands if you'd like to take a look." They followed her across the store, acutely aware of how their footsteps sounded against the marble floor. Rose noticed a few glances from other customers and resisted the urge to tug at her dress or pat her silver-streaked hair, which she had arranged in a simple bun that morning. As they approached the display case, a tall man in an expensive suit glided over. His silver hair was cut in a precise style, and a gold pin shaped like a diamond adorned his lapel. The name tag on his chest read, Howard Preston, Manager. "Tiffany, I need you to assist Mrs. Blackwell with the Sapphire Collection," he said, smoothly, never taking his eyes off Frank and Rose. "I'll help these folks." Tiffany nodded and walked away, throwing a quick apologetic glance over her shoulder. Howard's smile didn't reach his eyes as he asked, "What brings you in today?" Frank stood a little straighter. "We're celebrating 30 years of marriage next week. I thought it was time my wife had something special to mark the occasion." "How thoughtful," Howard replied, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. "Did you have a particular budget in mind?" Before Frank could answer, Rose pointed to a delicate pendant in the case before them. It was a simple design, a small teardrop diamond set in white gold on a thin chain. "That's lovely," she said softly. Howard glanced down at where she was pointing. "Ah, yes, that piece is $18,000. Rose quickly withdrew her hand as if the glass had suddenly become hot. Oh my. Perhaps I could show you our more accessible collection? Howard suggested, emphasizing the word in a way that made it clear he thought even that might be a stretch for them. Frank's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. Actually, we're just getting ideas today. What can you tell us about that pendant my wife liked? Howard's eyebrow arched slightly. It features a 1-carat diamond, VVS clarity, set in 18-carat white gold. The chain is also 18-carat. It's one of our more understated pieces. It's beautiful, Rose said, admiring the way it caught the light. Simple but elegant. 2 well-dressed women at a nearby counter were now openly watching the interaction, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and amusement. One whispered something to the other, and they both smirked behind manicured hands. Howard cleared his throat. Perhaps you'd like to see something more practical? We do have a collection of silver pieces with cubic zirconia that mimic the look of diamonds, quite convincingly. Frank's cheeks flushed slightly, but he kept his composure. No, thank you. We're interested in real diamonds. My wife deserves the best. Rose squeezed his arm gently, a silent signal that it was okay, that they could leave, but Frank stood his ground. I see, Howard said, his patience visibly thinning. Well, unfortunately, all of our diamond pieces start at several $1,000s. Based on your... He paused, eyes flicking over Frank's worn jeans and Rose's simple dress. Situation, I'm concerned we might be wasting each other's time. A heavy silence fell between them. Rose felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. Our situation? Frank repeated quietly. Frank, it's okay, Rose whispered, tugging gently at his sleeve. Let's just go. But Howard was already closing the display case with a definitive click. I think it would be best. We cater to a certain clientele here, and I have a responsibility to ensure my sales staff aren't distracted from customers who are in a position to make actual purchases. Frank's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he took a deep breath and unclenched them. I understand. You've made your position very clear. By now, several other customers had turned to watch the uncomfortable scene unfolding. One man in a business suit frowned disapprovingly at Howard, but said nothing. Perhaps the mall would have options better suited to your price range, Howard suggested, already turning away. Thomas, he called to a security guard positioned near the door. Please escort these people out, they were just leaving. The security guard, a young man with an uncomfortable expression, approached reluctantly. Sir, ma'am, if you could please come with me. Rose felt tears stinging her eyes as she turned toward the door, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. Frank placed a protective arm around her shoulders, his back straight, and his head held high despite the humiliation burning in his chest. As they were led to the door, a woman in designer clothes shook her head and muttered to her companion, Really, some people should know their place. Why even come in here? The comment, not quite whispered softly enough, reached Rose's ears, and a single tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Frank's arm tightened around her, and he guided her gently but quickly through the door the security guard held open. The bright sunlight outside seemed harsh after the elegant lighting of the store. Rose took a shaky breath as they stood on the sidewalk, the door closing firmly behind them. I'm so sorry, Rose, Frank said, his voice tight with anger and hurt. I never should have brought you there. Rose wiped away her tear and straightened her shoulders. It's not your fault. Some people just judge a book by its cover. Always have, always will. Frank looked back at the store, his expression hardening with resolve. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, an older model with a cracked screen protector. I need to make a quick call. Rose watched curiously as he dialed a number from memory and waited. When someone answered, his tone changed subtly, becoming more formal, more authoritative. Hello, Paul? It's Frank. I need you to come to Brilliance Jewelers on Main Street right away, and bring the portfolio from my office safe. He paused, listening to the response. Yes, the black one. And Paul? Come in the good car. He hung up and turned to Rose with a small, mysterious smile that she hadn't seen in years, the same smile he'd had decades ago when he'd come home to their tiny apartment, with news that would change their lives forever. "Frank, what are you up to?" she asked, recognizing that gleam in his eye. He took her hand, his thumb gently brushing over the simple gold band he'd given her all those years ago. "Just setting things right, Rosie. Some lessons need teaching, and I think it's about time Mr. Howard Preston learned who he's really dealing with." Rose stood beside Frank on the sidewalk, still stinging from the humiliation they had just experienced. A couple walking by glanced at them with curiosity, probably wondering what two older, plainly dressed people had been doing in such an upscale jewelry store in the first place. "Maybe we should just go home," Rose suggested, squeezing Frank's hand. "We can celebrate our anniversary with a nice dinner instead. I don't need jewelry to know you love me." Frank shook his head, a determined look settling over his weathered features. "No, Rosie. I've let too many people look down their noses at us over the years. Not today. Not on our anniversary." Rose studied her husband's face. Despite 30 years of marriage, he could still surprise her. Most of the time, Frank was easygoing and unbothered by what others thought. But occasionally a streak of stubborn pride would surface. The same determination that had helped him overcome so many obstacles in their life together. "What exactly did you tell Paul on the phone?" she asked, her curiosity growing. Before Frank could answer, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb in front of them. The car gleamed in the sunlight, its windows tinted just enough to obscure the driver. A moment later, the door opened, and a man in his early 40s stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit that probably cost more than Frank's truck and carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," he said with a warm smile and a respectful nod. "Is everything all right?" Rose always found it amusing when Paul called them by their last name. He had been working with Frank for over 15 years, but never dropped the formality, despite their insistence. "Not exactly, Paul," Frank replied, gesturing toward the jewelry store. "We just had an unpleasant experience in there. The manager decided we weren't worth his time." Paul's expression darkened. As Frank's right-hand man and legal advisor, he had seen firsthand how people often underestimated his boss based on appearances. "I see," Paul said, his tone shifting to the crisp, professional one he used in board meetings. "And you'd like to address the situation?" Frank nodded. "I think it's time for a little lesson in manners." Paul handed him the black leather portfolio. "Everything you requested is in here. The company documents, the board certificates, and the letter from the acquisition team." Rose's eyes widened slightly as she realized what Frank was planning. "Oh, Frank, you're not going to—" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I'm just going to introduce myself properly, that's all." Inside Brilliance Jewelers, Howard Preston was helping a well-dressed couple choose between two diamond tennis bracelets when he spotted Frank and Rose returning through the front door. This time, however, they weren't alone. The man in the expensive suit walked slightly ahead of them, holding the door open with the practiced air of someone used to being respected. Howard frowned and excused himself from his customers. He signaled to Thomas, the security guard, who began moving toward the entrance but stopped short when he noticed the quality of the newcomer's attire and the authoritative way he carried himself. "I believe I made myself clear earlier," Howard said as he approached, directing his words at Frank and Rose while giving the suited man an appraising glance. "We can't help you today." Paul stepped forward, extending his hand. "Paul Richardson, Chief Legal Officer for Henderson Enterprises. I don't believe we've met." Howard hesitated before shaking the offered hand, confusion evident on his face. "Howard Preston, store manager. I'm afraid I don't understand what's happening here." By now, the entire store had gone quiet. Customers and staff alike were watching the scene unfold, sensing that something significant was taking place. "It seems there was a misunderstanding earlier," Paul said smoothly. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were treated in a manner that was less than hospitable." Howard's eyes darted between Paul and the couple, uncertainty replacing his previous confidence. "Henderson, I'm not familiar with—" Frank stepped forward and opened the leather portfolio. He removed a document and handed it to Howard. Perhaps this might help clarify things. Howard took the paper, his brow furrowed as he began to read. Gradually, the color drained from his face. He looked up at Frank with new eyes, suddenly seeing him not as a shabby old man, but as someone else entirely. "You're Franklin Henderson?" Howard's voice had risen an octave. "The Franklin Henderson?" A few gasps came from the staff who recognized the name. Tiffany, who had initially greeted them, placed a hand over her mouth in shock. Frank nodded, his expression neutral. "I am." "The owner of Henderson Global Industries?" Howard continued, his voice growing weaker. "Among other things," Frank replied, modestly. What Howard was holding was proof that Frank Henderson wasn't just wealthy. He was in a financial league that made most of the store's regular customers look middle class by comparison. Henderson Global Industries was a conglomerate with interests in everything from technology to real estate, with annual revenues in the billions. "But I don't understand," Howard stammered, looking at Frank's worn jeans and simple shirt. "Why would you dress like this?" Frank finished for him. "Because these clothes are comfortable. Because I grew up poor and never developed expensive tastes. Because I value people for who they are, not what they wear or how much money they appear to have." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It's a shame you don't operate your business the same way." Howard swallowed hard, suddenly very aware that every person in the store was watching and listening. "Mr. Henderson, please accept my deepest apologies for the misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to make this right." "That's not why we came back," Frank interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "We came back because my wife liked a pendant, and I wanted to buy it for her." Rose touched his arm gently. "Frank, we don't need to do this." "I know we don't need to," he replied quietly, "but I want to." He turned back to Howard. "The teardrop diamond pendant. I'd like to see it again, please." Howard practically tripped over himself, rushing to the display case. With trembling hands, he unlocked it and carefully removed the pendant Rose had admired earlier. "An excellent choice. One of our finest pieces." As Howard placed the pendant on a velvet display pad, Tiffany approached cautiously. "Mr. Preston, should I prepare the paperwork for Mr. Henderson's purchase?" Howard shot her a warning look, but Frank smiled at the young woman. "Yes, please. And it's just Frank." While Tiffany went to prepare the sale, the other customers in the store were whispering among themselves, some discreetly trying to take photos with their phones. It wasn't every day they got to see a billionaire in worn jeans buying jewelry for his wife of 30 years. "It really is beautiful," Rose said softly as she looked at the pendant. Despite everything, her eyes still lit up at the simple elegance of the piece. "Try it on," Frank encouraged. Howard quickly unclasped the necklace and, with exaggerated care, moved to place it around Rose's neck. His hands were shaking so badly that he fumbled with the clasp. "Allow me," Paul offered, taking the necklace and carefully securing it around Rose's neck. Rose turned to look in the mirror on the counter. The diamond caught the light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across her face. "Oh, Frank," she whispered, touching it gently. "It's too much." "Nothing's too much for you," he replied, the love of 30 years evident in his eyes. Howard cleared his throat. "Mr. Henderson, please allow me to offer you a substantial discount as a token of my sincere apology." Frank turned to him with a steady gaze. "The price is fine as it is. 18,000, correct?" Yes, sir," Howard stuttered. "Good. But there is something else I'd like to discuss with you." Frank turned to Paul, who removed another document from the portfolio and handed it to Frank. "I wasn't aware until today that Brilliance Jewelers was part of the luxury retail group." Howard nodded, confusion crossing his face again. "Yes, for about 5 years now. They acquired us during their expansion." "Interesting," Frank said, looking down at the document in his hands. "Because Henderson Ventures just finalized a controlling interest in luxury retail group last week. The paperwork hasn't been made public yet, but it will be announced on Monday." Howard's face went from pale to ashen. You own? Not personally, Frank corrected. My company does, but yes, as of Monday, I'll effectively be your boss's boss's boss. He smiled slightly. Funny how things work out, isn't it? The security guard, Thomas, who had been hovering nearby throughout the exchange, suddenly found something fascinating to look at on the ceiling. The customers who had smirked earlier were now staring open-mouthed at the unfolding scene. Tiffany returned with the paperwork, either unaware of or wisely ignoring the tension. Everything's ready, Frank. Will you be paying by credit card? Frank reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a black card with no visible logo, the kind of exclusive credit card that most people only heard rumors about. This should cover it, he said, handing it to her. As Tiffany processed the payment, Frank turned back to Howard, whose career was visibly flashing before his eyes. I believe we have some things to discuss about customer service policies, but that can wait until Monday. Today is about celebrating with my wife. Howard nodded mutely, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The transaction complete, Frank took Rose's hand. Ready to go, Rosie? We've still got that dinner reservation to make. Rose nodded, still a bit overwhelmed by the turn of events. As they turned to leave, with Paul following a respectful step behind, she paused and looked back at Howard. The pendant really is lovely, she said kindly. Thank you for your help. And with that, the couple walked out of the store, leaving behind a stunned manager, an impressed staff, and a story that would be told and retold in Westbrook for years to come. News travels fast in small towns, and by the next morning, the story of what happened at Brilliance Jewelers was spreading like wildfire through Westbrook. As Frank poured himself a cup of coffee in their modest kitchen, his ancient flip phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the caller ID and sighed. Morning, Mayor, he answered, giving Rose a knowing look as she buttered her toast. Rose could hear the excited voice on the other end of the line even from across the table. She smiled and shook her head. Until yesterday, most people in town had no idea who they really were. Frank and Rose Henderson had lived in the same small house on Oak Street for almost 25 years, driving the same old truck, shopping at the same local stores, and keeping to themselves. No, Frank was saying into the phone. That's very kind of you, but really not necessary. Yes, I understand it would be good for the town, but... He rubbed his forehead. Can I think about it and call you back? Thanks. He set the phone down and took a long sip of coffee. Let me guess, Rose said, sliding a plate of eggs toward him. Suddenly the mayor wants to have dinner with us? Frank chuckled. Dinner, a key to the city, and he thinks we should be the grand marshals of the Founders' Day parade next month. Rose reached across the table and took his hand. Are you sorry about yesterday? About people finding out? Frank considered the question seriously. They had worked hard to maintain their privacy over the years, to live normally despite their wealth. It hadn't been easy, especially as Henderson Global Industries grew beyond anything they had initially imagined. No, he finally said. I'm not sorry. That Howard fellow needed a lesson in treating people with respect. But I am worried this might change things for us here. Before Rose could respond, there was a knock at the front door. They exchanged curious glances. They rarely had visitors, especially this early. Frank went to answer it, finding Tiffany from the jewelry store standing nervously on their porch. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking very different from her polished appearance at the store. Mr. Henderson, she said, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry to bother you at home. I asked Paul where I could find you, and he gave me your address. I hope that's okay. Frank glanced back at Rose, who had appeared in the hallway behind him, then stepped aside. Come in, Tiffany, and please call me Frank. They led her into their living room, a cozy space with well-worn furniture, family photos on the walls, and books stacked on almost every surface. Nothing about it suggested the home of a billionaire. Tiffany perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa. I came to apologize for yesterday. I should have stood up to Mr. Preston when he was rude to you. Rose sat down beside her. That's very kind, but it wasn't your responsibility. You were just doing your job. That's just it. Tiffany said, twisting her hands in her lap. After you left, Mr. Preston called a staff meeting. He told everyone that we need to be extra careful about how we treat customers from now on, but for all the wrong reasons. He said we never know when someone might be a secret billionaire or have connections. She looked up at them, her expression troubled. It's like he didn't learn anything at all. Frank nodded thoughtfully. I'm not surprised. People like Howard rarely change their thinking overnight. That's why I quit, Tiffany said quietly. You quit your job? Rose asked, concerned. Because of what happened with us? Tiffany straightened, her shoulders. I've been saving up to go back to school anyway. I want to study business. Working at a place that judges people based on how they look or what they wear, I just couldn't do it anymore. Frank exchanged a look with Rose, one of those silent conversations that couples develop after decades together. Tiffany, he said, leaning forward in his chair. Have you ever heard of the Henderson Scholarship Program? She shook her head. It's something Rose and I started about 15 years ago. We provide full scholarships to students who demonstrate exceptional character and work ethic, regardless of their academic standing or financial background. That sounds amazing, Tiffany said. But why are you telling me this? Rose smiled warmly. Because we think you might be exactly the kind of person the program was designed for. Tiffany's eyes widened. But you barely know me. We know enough, Frank said. You showed integrity yesterday, and even more by coming here today. That tells us a lot about your character. I don't know what to say, Tiffany whispered, tears forming in her eyes. You don't need to say anything right now, Rose assured her. Here's Paul's business card. Call him next week and he'll help you with the application process. As Tiffany was leaving, still stunned by the unexpected turn her morning had taken, another car pulled into the driveway. This one was a police cruiser. Now what? Frank muttered. Chief Walker stepped out, adjusting his hat before walking up to the porch. He'd been the town's police chief for almost as long as Frank and Rose had lived there, and they'd always exchanged friendly waves when passing each other around town. Morning, Frank. Rose, he said with a nod to Tiffany as she slipped past him. Got a minute? Once they were seated in the living room again, Chief Walker got straight to the point. I'm guessing you've already heard that the whole town's talking about you two. Frank sighed. We figured as much. Well, I've got a situation down at the station I thought you should know about, the chief continued. Howard Preston was caught, speeding through town at about midnight. When my officer pulled him over, he was clearly drunk. Had an open bottle of scotch in the passenger seat. Rose gasped softly. Is everyone okay? He didn't hurt anyone, did he? No, thank goodness, Chief, Walker assured her. We got him before any real damage was done. But here's the thing. He keeps claiming that he was set up, that you're out to ruin him. He looked directly at Frank. Says you're using your billions to destroy his life because he didn't recognize you in the store yesterday. Frank shook, his head in disbelief. That's ridiculous. I barely gave the man a second thought after we left the store. That's what I figured, the chief nodded. But he's demanding we call you, claiming you'll want to handle this quietly. Whatever that means. He thinks I'll pay him off, Frank asked incredulously. To keep him out of trouble for driving drunk? Chief Walker shrugged. Some folks think money can fix anything. I'm guessing Mr. Preston is one of them. Rose leaned forward, her expression serious. What's going to happen to him? Standard procedure. He'll be charged with DUI, reckless driving, and having an open container. Judge Wilson will see him on Monday morning. Frank nodded slowly. Thank you for letting us know, Chief. But please treat this case exactly as you would any other. No special handling one way or the other. After Chief Walker left, Rose turned to Frank with worry in her eyes. This is getting out of hand, isn't? At first the mayor, then Tiffany, now this business with Howard. Everyone's looking at us differently. Frank put his arm around her shoulders. It'll settle down eventually. People will find something new to talk about. I hope you're right, Rose said, leaning against him. I liked our quiet life. The doorbell rang again before Frank could respond. This time, It was their neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, holding a homemade apple pie. "I just thought I'd bring this over," she said with a warm smile that didn't quite hide her curiosity. "And to say that if you need anything at all, you just let me know." At the office, Paul was waiting with news. "Howard Preston has resigned from Brilliance Jewelers, effective immediately." Frank frowned. "That wasn't my intention." "It wasn't your doing," Paul assured him. "According to my sources, it was his choice. Said he needs to reevaluate his priorities." "Maybe some good will come of this after all," Rose mused. Paul cleared his throat. "There's something else. The board wants to discuss the company's public image. With you as the majority shareholder, they think it might be time for Henderson Global to become more visible." Frank had been expecting this. For years, he'd avoided being the public face of his company, preferring to work behind the scenes. He had talented people who handled the press and public relations, but maybe that too needed to change. "Set up the meeting," he agreed, "but tell them I have some ideas of my own about the direction we should take." Later that afternoon, Frank and Rose walked hand in hand down Main Street, heading to the diner for a late lunch. Through the window, they could see their usual booth was occupied by a young family. A harried-looking mother trying to manage two small children while her husband studied a stack of papers with a worried expression. "Let's try somewhere else," Rose suggested, but Frank was watching the family intently. "Wait here a minute," he said, and entered the diner alone. Rose watched through the window as Frank approached the family's table. She couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the young father's expression change from wariness to surprise to cautious hope. Frank shook the man's hand, then the woman's, and patted one of the children gently on the head before returning outside. "What was that about?" Rose asked. "The man just lost his job at the lumber mill," Frank explained. "I recognized him. He was at the courthouse this morning, trying to get an extension on his mortgage payments." Rose's expression softened. And Henderson Builders happens to need a project manager for the new housing development outside town. Paul's been complaining about being short-handed for months." "Just like that? You offered him a job without knowing his qualifications?" Frank shrugged. "I could tell he was a hard worker from his hands, and I'm a pretty good judge of character. Besides, we can train him if necessary." Rose looped her arm through his as they continued walking. "So this is what it's going to be like now? You swooping in like some small-town guardian angel?" Frank chuckled. "I wouldn't put it quite like that. But yes, I think we're going to be more involved from now on." They had nearly reached the end of Main Street when a familiar figure emerged from a side alley. Howard Preston, carrying a cardboard box of what appeared to be personal items from his office. He stopped short when he saw them, clearly unsure whether to acknowledge them or pretend he hadn't seen them. After a moment's hesitation, Frank approached him. "Mr. Preston." Howard shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson." An awkward silence stretched between them until Howard finally spoke again. "I want to apologize for my behavior, both at the store and after. It was inexcusable." Frank nodded. "Apology accepted." Howard seemed surprised by the simple response. "Just like that?" "Everyone makes mistakes," Frank said evenly. "It's what we learn from them that matters." Howard looked down at the box in his arms. "Well, I've certainly learned something, though I'm not sure what I'm going to do now." Frank considered the man thoughtfully. He saw someone who had made poor choices, yes, but also someone who might be capable of change. "What did you do before you managed the jewelry store, Yao?" he asked. "I was in customer service training, actually," Howard replied with a hint of irony. "I used to teach retail staff how to create positive shopping experiences." Frank exchanged a glance with Rose, who gave him a small nod of understanding. "The community center we're planning will need someone to coordinate the job training program," Frank said carefully, "someone who understands both sides of the customer service equation. It would be a fresh start if you're interested." Howard stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you offer me anything after how I treated you?" "Because I believe people deserve second chances," Frank said simply. And because sometimes the best way to learn compassion is to receive it when you least deserve it. As the sun began to set over Westbrook, casting long shadows down Main Street, Frank and Rose finally made their way home. Their modest house looked exactly as it always had. The porch swing swaying gently in the evening breeze, the garden rose tended so carefully bursting with late summer blooms. But something had changed. Not in the house itself, but in what it represented. It was no longer a hiding place, a shelter from the expectations that came with their wealth. Instead, it had become a base of operations, a place from which they could reach out and truly become part of the community they had lived in for so long. "Do you think we made the right decision?" Rose asked as they settled onto the porch swing. "About not hiding anymore?" Frank took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring, still the same simple gold band after all these years. "I think we've been given an extraordinary opportunity to do good, and I think we'd be fools not to take it." As neighbors walked by, now waving with genuine warmth rather than curious stares, Frank and Rose waved back. The jewelry store incident had started as a moment of humiliation, but it had transformed into something neither of them had expected, a chance to live more honestly, more openly, and perhaps more purposefully than ever before. 1 year later, the grand opening of the Westbrook Community Center was scheduled for 10 o'clock, but people began gathering outside the renovated library building well before 9. Children ran excitedly around the new playground equipment installed on what had once been an empty lot next door, while their parents chatted in groups, many wearing t-shirts with the center's logo, a simple drawing of hands joined together, in a circle. Inside, Frank walked through the finished spaces, taking in every detail: the computer lab with brand new equipment, the daycare center with colorful walls and tiny furniture, the job training classrooms equipped with everything from culinary supplies to automotive tools, the senior center with comfortable chairs and large print books. Every inch of the building had been designed with the community's needs in mind. "There you are," Rose said, finding him in the main hall where rows of chairs had been set up for the opening ceremony. "People are starting to arrive. Are you ready?" Frank adjusted his tie, one of the few concessions he had made to the importance of the day. Otherwise, he was dressed as he always had been, in comfortable slacks and a button-up shirt that wouldn't make him stand out in a crowd. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied. "Is everyone here?" Rose nodded. Paul just arrived with the board members. Tiffany's helping set up the refreshments. She insisted on coming early even though she didn't have to. And Howard's in the training wing making sure everything's perfect. Frank smiled at the mention of Howard. The past year had seen a remarkable transformation in the former jewelry store manager. After accepting the position at the community center, Howard had thrown himself into the work with unexpected passion, developing a comprehensive job training program that had already helped dozens of Westbrook residents find better employment. "What about the family?" Frank asked. "They're all here," Rose assured him. Even Beth and the kids made it in from California. Their daughter had been skeptical about her parents' decision to go public with their wealth and take a more active role in the community. As the head of her own tech startup, Beth had grown accustomed to the privacy that came with her parents' low profile. But seeing the impact they were having on Westbrook had changed her mind. As 10 o'clock approached, the main hall filled with people from all walks of life. The mayor and town council sat in the front row, alongside representatives from Henderson Global Industries. Local business owners, many of whom had contributed to the center in various ways, filled the middle rows. And in the back, residents of all ages found seats. Young parents with small children, teenagers, elderly couples supporting each other as they walked. Frank stood just off stage, watching the diverse crowd through a gap in the curtain. A year ago, many of these people wouldn't have given him and Rose a second glance. Now they were all here, united by a common purpose. "Nervous?" a voice asked from behind him. Frank turned to find Chief Walker, dressed in his formal uniform for the occasion. "A little," Frank admitted. "I've never been one for public speaking." The chief chuckled. "Could have fooled me. That town hall meeting last month, you had everyone eating out of your hand." Frank shook his head. "That was different. I was just talking about something I believed in." And this isn't something you believe in? Chief Walker gestured toward the crowded hall. Before Frank could answer, the mayor stepped up to the podium and called for everyone's attention. It was time to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor announced with a broad smile, it is my great honor to welcome you to the grand opening of the Westbrook Community Center. This project, which has transformed a forgotten building into a vibrant hub for our town, would not have been possible without the vision and generosity of two very special residents. Please join me in welcoming Frank and Rose Henderson. Applause was thunderous as Frank and Rose walked onto the stage. Rose squeezed his hand encouragingly as they approached the podium. Frank cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of familiar faces. Thank you all for being here today. Rose and I we're overwhelmed by the support this project has received. He paused, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment. These weren't just neighbors and townspeople anymore. They were partners in something important. A year ago, he continued, his voice growing stronger, something happened that changed our lives. For a long time, Rose and I had kept a part of ourselves hidden from this community. We lived among you, but we weren't fully part of you. And then one day, because of a misunderstanding at a jewelry store, he smiled at Rose, who touched the teardrop pendant she still wore every day. Our secret was out. Murmurs and knowing smiles spread through the audience. We were afraid at first, Frank admitted. Afraid that once people knew about our wealth, everything would change. And we were right. Things did change, but not in the way we expected. Instead of distance, we found connection. Instead of suspicion, we found trust. And instead of keeping our resources to ourselves, we found joy in sharing them. As Frank spoke, he noticed Tiffany standing near the back of the hall, watching with clear pride. After completing her first semester of business school with top grades, she had approached Frank with a proposal for managing the community center's operations. Now she was thriving in a role that combined her people skills with her growing business acumen. This center doesn't belong to us, Frank continued, gesturing to the space around them. It belongs to all of you, to the children who will learn here, to the parents who will find support here, to the job seekers who will build new skills here, and to the seniors who will find community here. Rose stepped forward to join him at the microphone. We want to thank everyone who contributed to making this dream a reality, from the local businesses that donated supplies, to the volunteers who painted walls and planted gardens, to the town council that expedited permits. This truly has been a community effort. After the speeches and the ceremonial ribbon cutting, Frank and Rose made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and listening to excited plans for using the new facilities. Beth approached with her husband and children, the youngest clinging to her hand. Dad, she said, giving him a warm hug. This is incredible. I had no idea it would be this comprehensive. Frank smiled at his daughter. We had a lot of help. People around here know what they need better than we do. Beth's expression grew serious. I've been thinking about what you and Mom have done here, the way you've used your resources to make a real difference. She glanced at her husband, who nodded encouragingly. We want to do something similar in Oakland. There's a neighborhood near our office that could really use a place like this. Pride swelled in Frank's chest. That's wonderful, Beth. Your mother and I would be happy to share what we've learned. As the celebration continued, Frank noticed Howard standing somewhat apart from the crowd, observing the activity with a thoughtful expression. Frank made his way over to him. Quite a turnout, Frank commented. Howard nodded. It's amazing what you've accomplished here, Frank. I still can't believe you gave me a chance to be part of it. You've more than earned your place, Frank assured him. Your training program is already changing lives. Howard's gaze drifted to a young woman across the room, one of the first graduates of his program, now working as a manager at a local business. I think about that day in the jewelry store a lot, he admitted. How differently things might have turned out if I'd just treated you and Rose with basic decency. Life has a funny way of working out, Frank said. Sometimes our worst moments lead to our best opportunities. Howard considered this. You know, I got a call from my old boss at Luxury Retail Group last week. They want me to develop a customer service training program for all their stores. Apparently, they've had some issues with staff making assumptions about customers based on appearances. Frank laughed. Are you going to take it? I told them I'd consult, but my main job is here, Howard said firmly. Some lessons are worth sharing. As the day progressed, Frank found himself drawn to the playground outside where children were climbing and sliding with abandon. He sat on a bench watching their carefree play with a sense of deep satisfaction. Rose joined him, slipping her hand into his. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking about my father, Frank said quietly. How he worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. How he always said that if he ever had money, he'd use it to make sure other people didn't have to struggle the way he did. Rose rested her head against his shoulder. He would be so proud of you, Frank. Of us, he corrected her. Everything we've built together. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the new community center, Frank and Rose Henderson sat hand in hand watching the town they had always loved from a distance now embrace them fully as their own. The jewelry store incident, what had seemed like a humiliating moment, had turned out to be the beginning of something beautiful. A simple couple had been thrown out of a store because of how they looked, and in the process, they had discovered that their true wealth wasn't in their bank accounts or business holdings. It was in their capacity to bring people together, to lift others up, and to create something lasting that would benefit generations to come. The teardrop diamond pendant caught the light as Rose turned to Frank. Happy anniversary, she whispered. Frank smiled, remembering that it had been exactly 1 year and 1 week since that fateful day at Brilliance Jewelers. Happy anniversary, Rosie, he replied. Here's to many more. Around them, the sounds of community, of children laughing, of neighbors talking, of lives being changed, rose up like music. It was the sweetest sound they had ever heard.